Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business podcast. I'm your co-host, JP John Poz from the Two-Man Power Trip, and joining me is the financial wrestling genius himself, Mr. Lavie Margolin. Lavie, how you doing today, sir?
Hey, John, I'm doing great. A really fun and interesting opportunity for us today. I actually had come across some information on the. We have two members of the band joining us today, but a band called the Foleys. If you're watching the YouTube version, I think it's becoming clear why they are called the Foleys. But they love music, they love wrestling, and we're really pleased to welcome two members of the band today, Manny and Professor Pain. Welcome.
Hi, guys. Thank you.
Let's start off with Professor Pain, just because I want to get a little bit of background. Where did you grow up? Where you're from? And of course, what were you a wrestling fan of growing up?
Sure. So I grew up in a small town in Indiana, northern Indiana, called South Bend. So we are a stone's throw away from the University of Notre Dame. That is, I guess, our claim to fame. We used to have Studebaker here and Avanti here. When I became a fan of wrestling, I was kind of born into it. Both my father and my uncle were professional wrestlers. My uncle more accomplished than my father. My uncle was actually a jobber for WWA and NWA in the Indianapolis territories. He had matches with Greg the Hammer Valentine, George Animal Steel. He ended up having about 53, 54 matches. He was trained by Dick the Bruiser down in the Indianapolis territory. Nice. From the time 1970 is when he started, 1981 is when he stopped, and he was almost president of the IWF before they folded in '89.
Wow. Interesting history there. That's awesome. You got a lot of lifeblood in the business. That's great. I love that.
Indeed.
Manny, what about you?
Also from South Bend. My history is not as impressive as Professor Payne's, but back in around 1987, my dad took me to the Joyce Center at Notre Dame, where they used to have live WWF events, and instantly fell in love with the sport.
How do you go from melding, though, like loving the sport to then doing some music about wrestling? How does that all come about?
Well, we were looking for a gimmick because we've been in serious bands. Everybody in the band, we've all been in these like serious bands where we've really tried to make a run at the industry. This time around, we wanted to have fun, and we decided, hey, what a better gimmick than professional wrestling with Professor Payne's background, and then at least three of us growing up during the Attitude Era and spending every night, every Monday night watching WWF or WWE. And it just developed in us. We just decided to go for this.
It's interesting. Like, obviously the gimmick is awesome, and anything wrestling related to me, when you meld it with anything, it's awesome. But to meld it with music is obviously really cool. Professor Pain, were you a fan like growing up your whole life, or just because your family was in the business, it's like, I got to be a fan? You know what I mean? Or were you just a fan and you loved what you're saying as far as Attitude Era and things like that?
Sure. I think at an early age, I was indeed indoctrinated into it. When they would come into the South Bend area or the territory, my father and my uncle were both in charge of setting up the ring, helping to promote the shows, things like that. So at a very early age, I was around it, but I found a genuine love for it. For a few years, when I was young, I kind of got out of it just because I was too far deep into it. And then I went to, coincidentally enough, the University of Notre Dame. They were showing the first WrestleMania on pay-per-view there at a building there called the Steffen Center. And my brother and I have an older brother. My brother and I, we went and we fell in love again. We fell in love with all of the hype and all of the pageantry and everything else. And, pretty much been fans ever since. So,
Manny, did it start in the Attitude Era, or were you a fan before that?
No, it started in the late 80s. The first show I ever went to, like I said, was at the ACC Center at Notre Dame. And my dad was talking some trash to Bam Bam Bigelow, and he threatened him with a chair, and scared the life out of me, obviously. But then we ended up backstage after the show and met some of the guys, so it's like a 7 or 8 year old kid back then. It was just like larger than life, and it just stuck with me.
Man, I went to a show here at the Brendan Byrne Arena in East Rutherford, New Jersey, around that same time period, and my dad's friend was with us, and he was getting into it. Him and I and Mike Sharp almost came to blows. I couldn't believe it. It was crazy.
It was a different era back then. The wrestlers got way closer and way more personal, I think.
Professor Payne, are you allowed to mention the name of the well, I guess the name your dad used when he was in the NWA and stuff? Are you allowed to bring that up? Are you allowed to mention it?
So I could bring up my uncle's name. My dad, he went by two. One I can't really bring up because it's too close to my actual name. But the other one, he wrestled as the Professor in WWA, being a jobber. My uncle wrestled as Mr. Indiana. Also, Tom Lynch was his name. He's still, to this day, I believe he's 82 or 83 years old, and he still owns and operates a small gym here in South Bend, which is dedicated to bodybuilding, powerlifting, and professional wrestling.
Have you ever considered wrestling?
In my earlier years, I did. Actually, my uncle talked me out of it. He said, if you're looking for money and fame and fortune and all of that, you probably won't find it there. You have about 10 years, maybe 12 years, and your knees are gonna go, your back's gonna go. So instead, I ended up embarking on amateur bodybuilding, and then I did a little bit of mixed martial arts as well.
Manny, what about you? Have you ever been in the ring? Have you ever thought about getting in there and wrestling?
I've always wanted to have a sports background, mostly through football, but it never materialized. And now I'm just too old to take the bumps, even though I kind of want to.
Are you a huge Mick Foley fan? Is that what's going on here with the Foleys?
Yeah, we are. Everybody in the band. Mick Foley is our number one.
Pretty amazing, the connection with him, right? I mean, you guys were able to hang out and play and sing with him, right?
Yeah, he came up on stage with us back in October at a bar called Bonus Pints. He was doing a signing. He hung out with us for a while. Came up and sang our version of Blitzkrieg Bop, which is Elbow Drop. We have some great footage of that, and he was just one of the nicest guys ever.
When that happens, right? Is that you guys setting that up? Is that him doing that organically? Like, how the heck did that all come together?
The bar there had organized a signing event, and then they asked us to play. And
okay.
So we knew he was going to be there ahead of time. I don't think he knew that we were going to be there. And we went through the line, did the signing, and got pictures. And then we were talking after he was done, and he asked if he could come up on stage with us if we did anything that he would know. And the rest is just history.
Professor Payne, what is that experience like when one of your heroes is up there singing with you?
Yeah, absolutely. He was a super nice guy, super down to earth. Not only did we go through the line like Manny said, but once we got to the table, was giving us multiple group pictures, was giving us multiple signings, and was even cracking wise with us. He had said, just make sure that you don't become too big, or my legal team might have to have a word or two with you. And it was all tongue in cheek. We had a great night. Unfortunately, he couldn't stay for the whole set. He had the next stop for him was in Kalamazoo, Michigan, but he was able to stay for about the first 3 or 4 songs. We did get him on stage for our rendition of Blitzkrieg Bop, which is Elbow Drop, and he seemed to have a great time. So I liked the fact that, number one, we were able to share the stage with our namesake, and for two, we try to bring more awareness of being able to meld that symbiosis between wrestling and rock and roll to those people who were just there for a show, right? They were locals who just thought, hey, some band, a band's going to play, and then they end up finding out, oh, it's because Mick Foley's there and they're the Foleys. And then so hopefully we brought in a couple or a few new wrestling fans, and hopefully we converted a few from who were just wrestling fans to music fans as well.
Very, very cool. Love it. Love how the bar kind of orchestrated that all. That's great. Great job by them. Lavie, I'll turn it over to you. I know you got some good questions.
Yes, and before I'm gonna take my Mick Foley story. So the second wrestling show I ever went to. So the first was at Madison Square Garden, Hulk Hogan against Canadian Earthquake. The second, uniquely, was Herb Abrams' Universal Wrestling Federation, which was at the Penta Hotel across the street. Wasn't familiar anything with independent wrestling. My father worked in a school. The librarian in the school was a huge wrestling fan, and he told my father about it, hearing that I was a wrestling fan. So we went to this show that lasted hours and hours. But to get up to the venue, everyone used the same elevator. When I say everyone, that included the wrestlers. So it happened that my father and I and librarian got in, and who was in the elevator? Terry Bam Bam Gordy, Steve Dr. Death Williams, Paul Mr. Wonderful Orndorff, and Mick Foley. Now that I think about it, given like elevator weight limits, we probably should have waited. I think it's hard to exceed the weight limit in an elevator, but that probably wasn't the best idea. Didn't say a word to them or whatever, but it was just like a cool moment. So being that this is the business of the business, of course, besides growing and being wildly successful musicians, how do you see like the business side? Like ideally, how would you like to connect wrestling to music? Would you like to produce the music for wrestlers? Do you want to have combined shows? Like in an ideal world, how does this all play out?
I think for me, the ideal world is we're participating at fan events. We're working with local wrestling promotions. We'd like to work with the bigger guys too. Would love to connect with somebody at WWE or even AEW for some fan events. Personally, I would like to collab with R-Truth because he's a genius and I love that guy. But that's what I envision us doing, is just working closer with wrestling fans and the business to do fan events, just stuff like that.
Sure. And
yeah, and I think, and I think for me, my answer is pretty paralleled with Manny's. We've had the opportunity to work some fan events for some smaller promotions here, and we're always looking to branch out. I don't think that we would be opposed to scoring any music for any wrestlers if we were approached. We kind of, when we had our first exposure to working with a promotion, it was just a great time. It was super fun. The crowd seemed to be super into it, and it was a good way for the wrestlers to take a quick break, right, a quick intermission, and then we were allowed to fill up that time. And we got a really good response. So we're just trying to make our way into more smaller promotions, but definitely would be interested if some of the bigger players said, hey, we have a fan setup going on, in say Fort Wayne or Indianapolis. Could you make it for intermission or something like that? We would absolutely want to, because I think that, a lot of times when you're watching wrestling and you're watching, all of the pyrotechnics and all of the lights and everything that goes along with it, it's pretty similar to how a concert is, how a music show is, right? Or how it should be. So I think it's a pretty easy transition, and I think it'd be very symbiotic for a live music group such as us to be able to make our way into those events and into the ring, to be able to, not only, share our love of wrestling musically, but also hopefully to win over some fans who may not have heard of us or have even known that there is this niche genre like this that we're a part of.
So not to put anyone on the spot, and I know that, everyone has different roles in the band. So if the lyrics aren't, either of your thing, that's fine. But if something comes to mind, any lyrics that like pro wrestling fans would like recognize and be like, oh, that's really cool to hear that in a song?
Well, I think Professor Pain writes all the lyrics, and every song has some aspect of pro wrestling to it, right? Everything is pro wrestling. We're working on one right now called Bang Bang. I think will sit well with any Mick Foley fan.
Yeah, I mean, in our set list, we have songs about Macho Man Randy Savage, where in a breakdown I say, the cream always rises to the top. So, of course, fans of Macho Man are going to know about that. We have another song called The Animal, which is about George the Animal Steele. We have another song about the Von Erichs. So, yeah, I mean, there is a lot of lyrics that we may have borrowed a little here or a little there from promos past, and maybe have integrated them in one way or another into our lyrics.
Sure. And I could speak for John possibly here also. Like, if you ever want to name drop the best wrestling podcast out there, we won't hold it against you.
We will definitely be giving you guys some shout outs on the socials, and maybe we throw something into a song. We'll turn this interview into a song.
So in terms of getting out there, have you, like, I'm sure the Midwest is most viable, like, an all-in type experience gathering weekend, but like, have you ever thought about, let's like jump in the van, go down to Vegas, let's just play as many gigs around, that weekend, like get seen, any adventures like that?
Yeah, so we're all about being weekend warriors. We actually have a bus. We have a short bus called the Hardcore Hauler that we drive around. We went our last time we went out like that, we ended up going to Louisville, Kentucky. We went to Charlotte, North Carolina?
Charleston, South Carolina, a little bit further away.
South Carolina.
Yeah.
So no, we're all about that. It's basically just trying to make sure that it fits in to all of our schedules to where we can do that. But we're actually looking at in the spring being on a radio station right outside of Columbus, Ohio, and then having 3 or 4 stops along the way, being able to play shows. But yeah, we are definitely up to wanting to get out there. And if that means a 10 or 12 hour drive, so be it. We all made sure to get our 4 hire licenses so that if we get pulled over, the law can't do anything about it. We're all grabbing passports because there's actually a really big punk scene just north of the border into London, Ontario. And that is definitely something that we would like to hit, along with it's right across the bridge from Detroit. And heading down south and heading out west. We're actually having next Monday, we're having a strategic planning meeting where we're going to basically plan out all of 2025 and see how many shows we can viably pack into this next calendar year to spread the Foleys cheer to the masses.
Nice. So interestingly, like some of the listeners we've heard most from about this show are promoters themselves, wrestling promoters. So any advice from your travels thus far that you would like to pass along in terms of, this was something that we did that got more attention than we expected, or this was a good way of branding ourselves that might be helpful across different spheres of sports and entertainment?
So we like to run promo in every town that we're going to be in through like Facebook and stuff like that. So we'll use paid advertisements to promote the shows. And then we try to start discussions and comment on other groups that are in that area, like their content. So we're like starting conversations as much as possible, reaching out to fans in the areas. Anywhere we go, we're always trying to get on like some sort of radio interview or podcast. And we're definitely seeking out other professional help too, as far as marketing and stuff like that goes, to just take the hands away from us a little bit and get someone with more experience in that.
Yeah. And I think too, the number one thing is be over the top, right? I mean, when you're there and you are performing, really, really, really ham it up, right? Not only are we musicians, but more so we're entertainers, right? Just like the smaller promotions that are out there, and having their events. Make sure that everyone is giving their all. Make sure that they are selling it. Make sure that they are going above and beyond, because that is going to be what the fans remember. They're going to remember, oh my gosh, that was such an insane show because of this, and that. And that's why usually through all our shows, I'm not really on stage for very long. I've got a wireless microphone. I run out in the crowd. I'll run up to the balconies, up and down the stage, to the bar, everywhere. I'm trying to get as much group participation as possible, because once again, we as being entertainers, we're trying to sell our brand. And I think that that's what smaller promotions are doing too. You want to make sure to try to ham it up as much as possible to leave a lasting memory with your fans long after you've left town.
Awesome. Let me turn it over to John.
So where can everybody find you, see you, and maybe see you perform next? What's the latest on where you guys will be and where everybody can find you, social media and otherwise?
Right now, it looks like our next show is going to be with Pro Wrestling Kings in South Bend on March 1st at the Century Center in South Bend, Indiana. It's a wrestling event. That's the next one that we have in the pipeline. We're taking a little bit of time off to write and rest. It was a pretty hectic 2024. Right now, our music can be heard anywhere on the internet. We prefer that you not stream it on Spotify, but Apple Music or a source like that. Spotify isn't really good to us, but everywhere else, I mean, we're streaming everywhere.
Yeah, and we have Facebook, we have TikTok, we have Instagram. We try to keep up with all the socials as much as we possibly can. I would say too, for anyone who is interested in wanting to know what 2025 has in store for the Foleys, or if any of you want us to come to your town, jump onto Facebook or jump onto Instagram. Send us a message. Our booking agent will get a hold of you and we'll respond and say, hey, let's work something out. We are extremely easy to work with. And if you're just wondering, where are we going to be once we figure out our strategic planning and everything, once again, jump on our socials like Facebook or Instagram. And we always try to put up a calendar so that way everybody knows, hey, these are the dates, these are the events. And we always leave a little bit of wiggle room in case halfway between stops, a fan might say, hey, you know what? We'd be interested in hosting a small show or something like that, a layover show. Are you interested in something like that? Which we absolutely always are. So feel free to get a hold of us any and every way you can.
And also, whenever you're getting a hold of us, it's always somebody in the band. So you're speaking directly with the band too. We don't let any. We have no content managers or anything like that. It's always one of us. So reaching out like the real fan experience, where you're actually talking to us.
Love that. The Foleys, and of course, Mick Foley approved. So you gotta love that as well. That's a big selling point.
Yep, we love that guy.
Manny,
Yeah.
Professor Pain, the Foleys. Thank you guys so much for all the time. Appreciate it, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Take
appreciate
care.
it.
Thanks, guys. All right, Lavie, let's get to some of the news with the latest of what's going on. Let's talk about GCW versus AEW and the big feud that keeps on going. It's crazy.
Yeah, it seems like a little petty, from Tony Khan, possibly. I think there's a lot of like miscommunication going on, rumors, different people representing AEW apparently, instead of maybe fanning the flames, making it a bigger deal. But this is what we know at the moment. Willie Mack was supposed to be booked for a show, I believe last Saturday or maybe the Saturday before, by the time you hear this, and something happened. So from the Observer Radio, Willie Mack called up GCW on Saturday and said that he was pulled from the show over the Effie situation. So Lauderdale called Sonjay Dutt, and he asked him if it's true, and Dutt said it's absolutely not true. So Brett called up Willie Mack and says, well, I wasn't pulled. I was specifically not pulled, but Christopher Daniels made it clear that I shouldn't go. from the AEW standpoint, they're saying that nothing like that happened, and Willie Mack called them and asked if it would be a problem to go, and they said you can go. Maybe he took it the wrong way, but AEW was very clear. And look, Sonya told Brett the same thing. They're not pulling Willie Mack from the show. He's under contract there, and he's not wrestling Saturday. There's two different sides of the story, and ultimately it was Willie Mack's choice. Was he pressured or just to do it on his own? We don't know. So, yeah, I mean, first of all, a lot of people's question was like, Willie Mack is signed to AEW? And, we had to look it up. So he's been on like some ROH show. So they're a little bit, and nothing against Willie Mack, I just mean like the volume, like they're a little bit like too many people on the roster. Sort of like WCW, like at a certain point, like, why are you doing this? But it's good if, obviously if it gives people a full-time salary or something sustainable. Hopefully, it's not the type of restriction that he gets a certain base pay, but then does need to supplement it with other shows, and then they're restricting that. But I think, a little bit of sniping here and there. But what would be most interesting about this, John, is this, like, I'm looking at politics and like world situations. So like, if one country is at war or feuding with another, then like another group, sort of joins in. So it'd be interesting because you have these sort of like loose alliances now, right? Like WWE has some sort of connection to GCW, has some sort of connection, a more formal connection to TNA. They have all of their ID affiliates now, and so on. They have, Pro Wrestling Noah. And then you have AEW with, New Japan, CMLL, those sorts of things. So, like, can we start seeing, like, it grow even more where, like, someone's like, well, you can't do GCW, and GCW just worked with Defy, so now we don't like Defy, that sort of thing. Like, to see, like, if there's more like politics to it that restricts people that are independent contractors. So that's the most interesting thing about it to me. I think like this little stuff will probably blow over or not, so that'll be interesting. But interestingly, depending on how many seats are ultimately open for Ring of Honor and for AEW, right? Both shows are sort of open to about 1,400 seats. That even though GCW is behind that number right now, it might end up being that GCW ends up having more people in the building. But it would be, when you set a high bar with 2,000 people, it would be disappointing. But also, interestingly enough, GCW is using the fact that AEW and Ring of Honor are in Hammerstein, sort of in angles, or maybe Cardona is doing it on his own. But GCW did tweet it out too. But Mark Cardona called out Jericho on GCW's show, and he vowed to defeat him and then defend the belt in the Hammerstein in January, of course. So I think, like, again, I think it does have positive effects for GCW. So it's hard to tell, like, what's really going on. But if they start restricting AEW talent, obviously that would be, somewhat of a challenge for them.
Yeah, that's one of the things. Like Cardona, obviously AEW is using him to kind of screw GCW, but it could end up making him a bigger heel in GCW when he makes his return. So one of those things, like slippery slope. You think you're screwing him, but you might be helping him.
Yeah, and you kind of like, I guess it's that balance of like reality and art. I don't think Effie, and he sort of like walked back what he said a little bit, but I certainly don't think he intended to like hurt a business relationship if he was thinking about that at all, but more of like GCW as the underdog and whatever. But sometimes, obviously, if you say something where there's family dynamics and, the son of one of the richest people in the world, I'd imagine, without amateur psychologist, like, is always trying to prove himself and his worth, that it's not like they call it Nepo baby, right? Like, yep. So there are like sensitivities if you're in that situation. So, you say the wrong thing, it's like, it's a hard thing to overcome.
Love that Cardona is playing like the middleman here as a babyface in AEW, and obviously he's a huge heel in GCW. And I don't know, making his position, you would say like, oh man, he's kind of ruining his position. I think he's making his position stronger. You know what I mean by doing this. Good job by him. Smart.
Yeah, and his whole thing has always been like GCW is terrible. You know, like he's always been knocking GCW and whatever it may be, so he could like lean into that more.
I like it. I like what he's doing. He's a smart businessman, which we've discovered over the last few years since leaving WWE. That's for sure. Very, very smart. And he'll be making double the money. Obviously, he's working all those shows, so he's going about it the right way.
Yeah, sure. And it's sort of like, I know he's been, sort of talking about wanting to land like a full-time contract and so on, but sometimes it is like to be the standout of the independents, there's a lot of opportunities there. Obviously, he's sort of like, maybe he's taken that as far as he could go, but maybe not, right? Like if you can now not only be the independents, but connect to one of the major promotions and get that money too, it's all good.
What is going on with NXT? What's the latest?
So not something that we talk about too much because obviously it's covered in many other ways. I just like found it like I like their like venue selection, like in LA, the Shrine Auditorium. It looks like a really cool place. It was the home of the USC Trojans and apparently some Lakers playoff games. I'd love to see some old video of that, but it just seems like for New Year's Eve, it just seems like the right size venue, maybe a little bit large, but you can't, can only do so much. That it's a 6,300 seat venue, and it just looks like really cool the way that it's set up. But talking about like selling tickets, I think anything outside of WWE's main brand, and then to a lesser extent AEW's pay-per-views, and then to a different degree TNA's major events, it's just hard to sell tickets. So I think we're even seeing that with NXT and Lowell, which is obviously the place that they wanted to be, was the Hammerstein Ballroom. That they've just sold 1,000 tickets for that. It's a 1,700, 1,800 seat venue. They'll be fine, but it just shows like, the struggles, even something as high profile as NXT is now on the CW, that, it's hard even to sell that out when you go on the road, let alone, going to bigger venues, which they've tried.
So when you're looking at obviously what's going on with NXT, do you think that them doing these other bigger shows is actually, like when they go to Lowell or whatever, do you think that that's actually, I don't know, helping them or hurting them? Because it feels like sometimes the crowd maybe not as big as you would expect. You know what I mean? Like for a WWE brand, quote unquote.
I think it's good to switch it up, like from a television perspective. Like it kind of gets a little stale to be in the same studio or venue every week. I think they've done a wonderful job of like building out what they're doing there in Florida, but it's interesting to have it be in different places. And I think that, not all the time you're going to hit, but like running Lowell is the type of place that I would run if I was going to do that every once in a while. And the biggest, highest profile shows, that would be the type of venue that I would do. So it's worth the risk. You can, you can play around with it a little bit. You have to be careful a little bit how much you comp, but to fill up Lowell, I guess we're nearly there. And maybe for some people, the first time they're hearing this, we're already there or have been there. But if you need to comp some seats, you can do that and fill up the rest, without too much trouble. But you have over 1,000, you shift around some of the seating and so on, it could look pretty good on television.
What's going on with the NWA?
So I haven't seen like an official press release about this, but certainly when they had to move, I'm not sure how much of a heads up they would have had. I'd imagine they'd had more than it seems like, but when they did move their weekly show to X, they had originally said 5 weeks, but Kerry Morton had written on LinkedIn actually recently, the NWA is excited to announce a new era for NWA Power as we make the switch to X for streaming. We're proud and fortunate to have signed a special partnership with X for a limited time, offering fans a new way to experience the intense action and classic storytelling that NWA Power delivers each week. So it kind of feels like the statement that would have been out when they first moved there, but this came just very recently. So I'd imagine that however they were performing is good, and X wants to keep people on the platform. So hopefully there's some money moving from X to NWA, or maybe it just works for them in terms of like getting more of a spotlight or promotion. So no one's really talking about that much, but for the show in Dothan, certainly when they planned it, I don't think they had any knowledge of Saturday night's main event, but trying to draw somewhat of a casual crowd to a somewhat larger venue than typically they run. Ticket sales were challenging before, and that certainly couldn't have helped. But they do have some local sponsorship from a company called Shield for their 2 cage matches. I believe one a women's match, one a men's match. So that certainly defrays some of the costs there. Dothan, not as many people as last year, but looks like they did fairly well relatively. I feel like even as we're a day out recording this, I think that there'll probably be some more pickup, and I could see it being like a type of walk-up crowd. Like, okay, what are we doing Saturday night? Are we watching the NWA on? Are we watching Saturday night's main event on TV? We could go to this local show, and whatever it may be. They also announced NWA Texas has another element to it, Texas-style wrestling. So just the previous week we had announced Jazz's promotion, the what's it called? Big Dog Wrestling, something related to dogs or whatever, obviously.
Dog Pound.
The Dog Pound, Big Node, right? Her husband. That's his gimmick. So they're building out Texas, which is all good. I think it's nice, like if you're a small promotion to be affiliated with the NWA, like it might be the coolest thing in the world for some people. But at the end of the day, where is Corgan getting to? I'm not sure, because during the Howard Brody days, like this was the NWA, right? But with more promotions, and it just like sort of grew and grew, like not necessarily in terms of popularity, but by the time Corgan took it over, there was a ton of promotions that just had an NWA name and kind of said like, no, we're not going to do it this way anymore. And sort of like brought it in house, and then very slowly, and now in the last year has been accelerating it a lot, like sort of like building out to these promotions. But it's it has as much resonance now basically as when Howard Brody had it. I think like, of course, with Billy Corgan, like he's able to get a lot of publicity, but it's hard to tell where's the NWA going, if anywhere. But obviously having the money, it doesn't have to go anywhere. This can be a hobby, but in terms of a business, it's hard to tell. Like, okay, like what are the next steps? How do we grow from here?
So what about TNA? I feel like there's always so much going on. There's one step forward, one step back, but then now they're kicking ass and taking names, but then they changed leadership.
Yeah, I was about like, besides trying to finish my schoolwork, I was going to write an article about like what a stellar second half of the year business-wise that TNA had, and then they sort of like dropped something else in here, which would have been the lead story if I would have moved my notes around, but we have some time to talk about it. Carlos Silva named president of Anthem Sports Group, a multifaceted sports and entertainment executive with more than 30 years of industry experience. They'll be overseeing the growth, the development, and the distribution of popular Anthem properties, including TNA, Invicta, Fight Network. He'll report directly to Len Asper. Carlos Silva is an incredible addition to our team, and his vast wealth of knowledge and experience in sports and television makes him the perfect choice. Throughout his career, he's overseen tremendous growth, and so on. From Len Asper. Anthem Sports diverse offering represent a wide range of exciting opportunities with Invicta and TNA and the Fight Network. So who is Silva? He has led and grown many sports and media properties throughout his career, including World Series of Fighting, Professional Fighters League, C360, World Team Tennis, Barrett Jackson, which is the racing, Universal Sports Network, which was sold to create the Olympic Channel. And it's interesting that he was actually just announced like a few months ago as a partner and president of 76 Capital Sports Advisory, and will continue to be part of that partnership. He has an investment banking career where he raised capital and negotiated major content and technology agreement. Okay, so what is all this? His most relevant experience is in Professional Fighters League. President CEO from 2000, basically like World Series of Fighting, then became PFL. So about 4 years. So that's just been like, they're really good at raising money, but I never saw them get any traction. And then he was part of World Team Tennis, which I think I've heard of, before. So in terms of like, obviously not talking at all about his capabilities as an executive, but like in terms of like, if you're saying like, okay, this person has done something and they can do it here, what is PFL? Like, it's still around, it's alive. So that's like, right. Like, or was that one bought by someone else? I'm getting myself confused, but
so PFL still, the Professional Fighters League still going today. They bought
okay, so
Bellator.
that's okay. So PFL bought Bellator. Okay, so I know one, but okay, and they're basically promoting themselves sometimes as like a duopoly, right? Like okay, we're the biggest, and so is UFC, and so that. So the fact that you can sort of like keep it alive to a certain point is something, but I'm a little bit suspect. Like if you look, again, not talking about the person, but just like the public career, like. He's done so many different things, some of which were a short amount of time, and even in July. And it sort of plays into a little bit Anthem. Like, there's so many executives coming and going that it seems like the only people that really stick well in Anthem are sort of like homegrown, like Ariel Schneerer. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Like, he really grew into his role with Anthem. He's not like a top executive, but he's a VP, and from what I understand, he's been running the day-to-day with TNA, I believe, overseeing Rob Kligman, who has seemingly implemented some really cool things with TNA in terms of revenue and like especially like premium seats and experiences and so on. They've been rocking and rolling in terms of their highest profile events as well. But now this is disruption, and it's another leader, and how will that integrate? So Sports Business Journal actually had a couple points. One that was specifically I wanted to key in on. But first of all, Silva told SBJ, there's a great buzz going on in pro wrestling right now. It's a great resurgence with what WWE has done. And recently the AEW deal. TNA is a long-standing property. They've got some great personalities. And the idea is I come in here and do what I've done at some other properties and really take a great foundation and build on it. So not to belabor it. So I'm just sort of like, okay, like what are the elements of what you've done, that have grown those brands and so on. So, he spoke highly of the opportunity to further scale Invicta, especially given current growth trends in women's sports, and to find synergies between pro wrestling and MMA. Everyone's always trying to do that, right? This near-term focus will be on sponsorships and broadcast distribution. So this is the part that I want to key in on. Broadcast distribution, working with Endeavor streaming on the TNA side. Invicta lands a CBS broadcast deal early this year. CBS, the sports network. That's actually not rated by Nielsen. Silva will report to Len Asper, and Turnkey ZRG coordinate the hiring process. So I guess like we're the headhunters. So Anthem, the owner, the owners of WWE, UFC, that company. So that's something if Endeavor is sort of like leading their distribution, because it could be something where WWE could talk to a number of companies, and I'm just supposing, and those that like were just too small to like be viable. Maybe there's something where they could, have that relationship where it goes through and they're like, TNA, we didn't really see a fit with whomever. Do you guys like want to talk to them about it? But endeavors like distribution deals and so on have been more on the streaming side, the fast side, and that's somewhere where TNA is already really strong. So I'm curious about that. Interestingly, having a new leader, it does give more leeway to like look at this like massive ticket on sale date, which I think is the 20th, where if New York, which is 17,000 seats, and LA, which is 10,000, but it's lower stakes because it's more of like, it's not like a major arena, even though it's in a major market and a large venue that you sort of look at and be like, you know what, we didn't get off to the best ticket sales. I'm not the one that came up with the idea, so let's cut this now, in terms of fiscal responsibility. But so that's in terms of new leadership. So the jury is out. Curious about that. But in terms of going for the right size venues and finding success, that's really been the wins for TNA. So double sellout in Atlanta. And yes, some people could be like, okay, it's a small venue and so on. But GCW just did, I think WrestleTix had it about like around 250 tickets. Heels Have Eyes got a lot of buzz, but they just announced like tickets on sale basically a week and a half out. So that didn't sell out. I don't know how far away it was from a sellout, but I got a screen grab, once the show had started and there were still, whatever the maximum number of GA tickets I could look at were available. Somebody enterprising has one GA seat for TNA on its second day on the 14th, and they're trying to sell that for $93. So, market scarcity, right? That's usually, I think, like a $30 or $40 ticket. Curtis Colwell in Dallas, right? There was a lot of like buzz to going into like not a huge building, but a nice size building that I believe New Japan and AEW has run. So they have a small reserve section, and then most of it is GA. But even in the reserve, there's still like front row tickets. But part of that is that I think they're tying that into like ticket packages where for $599 you get to have pizza with the Hardys and Nick Nemeth. You get a backpack, you get to get there early, you get a chair, you get barbecue with Jordan Grace, whatever it may be, like a full fan experience. So just because they haven't sold front row doesn't mean that ticket sales are especially slow, because seats behind that are still available. But be really curious to look at. So I think our first bellwether test is this massive online sale date. How do ticket sales go, and how does TNA management respond to that?
What about New Japan Pro Wrestling? What's the latest with New Japan? What's going on with Strong Style Evolved?
So Walter Pyramid, so they've done a little bit under 3,000 there in the past, maxed out. This time, tickets like really popped in the last 7 days, according to WrestleTix. 500 tickets moved. So I'm always like a little bit suspect about that, like where tickets taken, like where sections taken off the board. But WrestleTix usually does a good job of tracking that. So about 1,900 tickets moved a couple days out. So curious to see what the end result of that is. If you could do over 2,000 tickets and you're not WWE, not AEW these days, I think that's a win. It's just, all of the opportunity costs, flying people in. I know the West Coast obviously is much closer to Japan. It's still very far. The cost of the tickets and all that sort of thing. And not using that time in Japan. Obviously, it's a quieter time ahead of the January New Year shows. And then January 11th, now they have a bit of time, but it's less than a month away. 917 tickets distributed for a venue that can hold up to 2,145 in San Jose.
How about GC Dub? We're talking about them so much. Let's recap GC Dub.
Yeah, so just a look at a couple of things. The weekend is upon us as we're recording this. So not to belabor it, but ticket sales are slow. So in Arizona, the first day, second row ringside is nearly sold out, but still available on the day of the show. and LA, one of the most solid venues. Third row ringside has 10 or more tickets. Fourth row ringside has 10 or more tickets available. So I don't know if we could chalk that up to Saturday night's main event effect as well. But even, their strongest market that had been an automatic sellout, is struggling.
Now let's do some quick hitters, some here and there, as you like to refer to it. What else is going on in the world of wrestling?
So Heels Have Eyes, we actually covered that already. That was not a sellout. There were still GA tickets available. Something that I love, the local television distribution, even if it's not the most important thing in wrestling anymore. But Below Zero Wrestling in North Dakota is announced a deal with BEK TV across the whole state. So all of the different potential television platforms and markets in North Dakota, now they're fully covered with BEK TV. JCW, so Juggalo Wrestling, they're having their Deck the Jaws live show on Triller TV, a pay-per-view event, and it's free to attend for those that bring a new toy, coat, and food. This is, of course, taking place from the Majestic Theater in Detroit. So everyone go check that out. JCW Juggalos are for the kids, and of course with our friend Violent J. Next, talking about television distribution, All Caribbean Wrestling, which is making some waves there in the Caribbean. Tempo Networks, which has limited distribution here in the United States. Actually, on my system, Optimum, but it's on a premium tier. So very limited capability, but Tempo Networks is in the Caribbean. So good for them in their home market, but a little bit of distribution here in New York as well.
Love that. A lot of good wrestling stuff today. A lot of good stuff with the Foleys, who are a great band. Thanks to them. But let's wrap it up and head towards the plugs. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. Lavie, where can everybody find and follow you?
Sure. Follow me on X, Lavie Marg, LAVIEMARG. Check out my long-form articles on LionCubJobSearch.com. Join our group, The Business of the Business, on LinkedIn. We are the official business podcast of PW Ponderings, and we are distributed by the Creative Control Network.
Good stuff. Lavie, are you going to be going to AEW or ROH or...
So definitely not ROH, unfortunately, because it's a Friday night. But AEW will be like a game time decision. I have wanted to see them for a while. I'm not that intrigued by the current product. Probably the least intrigued of their years of existence. But the Hammerstein Ballroom is always a draw for me. So it might be a game time decision depending on tickets, how they're available, how I'm progressing with my doctoral research, so I don't miss a day on that. How about you, John?
I actually am more inclined. I'm not sure with schedule and all other stuff going on. I was actually more inclined to go to GC Dub than AEW or ROH. Although a buddy of mine said, "What about ROH?" And I said I would, but I kind of leaning towards GC Dub right now.
Yeah, GCW is definitely on my radar still. I'm kind of a little bit in the middle. Sorry, Brett. I want to go, but I only want to go if I have good seats, and good seats are still available, but they're kind of expensive. Not ridiculous, but kind of expensive. So I kind of want to know. I guess the matchups are coming out, but I want to know what's that prime match that's really gonna
and what's the main event? Yes,
put me over the top. Yeah.
Yep.
So I know that there's there's that homegrown main event, right? We know Mansour is going to be defending the belt against Effie. And whoever wins Effie and Alley Catch, and you might have a very homegrown GCW moment where these stars of the promotion they finally win the big one, and it's retribution because Effie lost against Jeff Jarrett and all that, so it's a potential great story. But I think you do need that outsider match that is going to draw people in. So maybe Cardona does come in with the belt, and maybe they are working together, and then Jericho comes into GCW. I don't want to create any unreal expectations or whatever. But like, I think there has to be something like that too.
Good point. Good point. But thank you, everybody out there, for listening. See you right back here next time for the next business of the business. See you next week, folks.